How exactly did the world's richest colony become the hemisphere's poorest nation? It's literally one of the most profound historical paradoxes of our modern world. Now, if you look at Haiti today, you might just see headlines dominated by crisis. But, just a few centuries ago, this very same nation generated unimaginable world-shaping wealth. So, what actually happened?
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack 500 years of compounding historical pressures to truly understand the headlines we see today. We're going to look past the surface and trace the deep, structural causes and effects that have shaped the nation of Haiti, relying on a really complex historical record to guide us.
Okay, let's dive into this. We'll be moving chronologically through 6 chapters today, starting with the wealthiest colony, then exploring the historic revolution, the devastating price of independence, the era of occupations and dictatorships, modern crises, and finally, Haiti's legacy of resilience.
Chapter 1. The Wealthiest Colony. Saint-Domingue's Rise and the Cost of Sugar. Now, what's really interesting about the early days is the sheer scale of it all. Back in the 1700s, the western half of Hispaniola was a booming French colony known as Saint-Domingue. And the economic output? It was absolutely staggering. We're talking 40% of the entire world's sugar, 60% of its coffee, and it generated an unbelievable 4/5 of France's total national revenue. But obviously, this wealth wasn't some miracle of industry. It was extracted through horrific human rights abuses. Nearly 500,000 enslaved Africans were toiling under brutally dehumanizing conditions just to feed the global demand for sugar and coffee.
Moving on to Chapter 2, the historic revolution, defeating empires to build a free republic.
You see, those profoundly brutal plantation conditions provided the exact spark needed for a massive fire. In 1791, a massive slave revolt erupted right in the sugar plantations of the north. Out of this total chaos emerged Toussaint Louverture, who was just an absolute strategic genius. By 1801, he had actually managed to push aside colonial power and take control of the territory. And while Louverture tragically died in captivity in 1803 during what became the longest and bloodiest revolution in the Americas, his forces ultimately achieved the impossible. They completely defeated a major imperial power, and in 1804, independence was declared.
And this declaration changed the world forever. No exaggeration. Haiti became the very first free black republic in history. What's crucial to understand here is that Haiti wasn't just exporting sugar anymore, right? It was exporting this incredibly potent revolutionary notion, the idea that black persons could be equal members of society. This was a massive global catalyst. It provided immense hope to enslaved people and abolitionists everywhere, while at the exact same time absolutely terrifying slaveholding nations, from neighboring colonial islands all the way up to the United States.
Chapter 3. The Price of Independence, a nation isolated and extorted.
So the crucial point here is the tragic paradox of this unprecedented victory. Winning their freedom immediately brought crippling international retaliation. Foreign powers effectively quarantined the new nation. France literally demanded a massive extortive ransom as compensation for the land and the enslaved people they had lost, a debt loaded with compounded interest that just continually drained Haitian resources in perpetuity. Meanwhile, the United States and European powers refused diplomatic recognition entirely, mostly driven by that fear of slave revolts in their own territories. So economic and political isolation was total, which ensured that true sovereignty and economic stability were virtually impossible to achieve right from the starting line.
To put the sheer severity of this into perspective, the source material notes this quite powerfully, stating, "The forced payments drew the very blood out of the Haitian people, and much of Haiti's stature in world affairs emerged in this horrific crucible." This unpayable French debt essentially stunted the nation's infrastructural and economic development from day one. I mean, imagine forcing a newly free people to pay their former captors just for the right to exist on the global stage.
Chapter 4. Occupations and Dictatorships, the Loss of Sovereignty in the 20th Century.
Fast forward to the 20th century. Forced poverty and deep internal instability, heavily mixed with external commercial interests, created a devastating new era of lost independence. In 1915, driven by those commercial interests and regional instability, U.S. Marines invaded and occupied Haiti. For nearly 2 decades, the U.S. took complete control of the Haitian treasury, rewrote local laws, and centralized power. When that occupation finally ended in 1934, it left behind highly fragile institutions and a highly centralized military apparatus. And this environment paved the exact way for subsequent dictatorships, leading right up to 1957, when François Papa-Doc Duvalier seized absolute power. This kicked off a nearly 30-year dynasty that didn't end until 1986.
The facts of the Duvalier regimes.
first under Papa Doc and later his son Jean-Claude, are frankly harrowing. They ruled through this terrifying mix of crude populism and extreme repression. They utilized notorious paramilitary death squads known as the Tontons Maquutes to enforce their will. Through sheer violence and state-sanctioned starvation, they decimated political opposition and everyday citizens alike, basically monopolizing the state into an extravagant cult of personality. This dark period deeply entrenched a legacy of totalitarianism, corruption, and massive social inequality.
Chapter 5: Earthquakes and Modern Crises, Natural Disasters and Systemic Vulnerabilities.
By the dawn of the 21st century, Haiti's state infrastructure had been so thoroughly weakened by the debt, the occupation, and the dictatorships that it was entirely unprepared for the environmental and economic shocks that were looming. In January of 2010, a catastrophic 7.0 magnitude earthquake struck just outside the capital. 230,000 people lost their lives. That number is just hard to even wrap your head around. Well over 1 million people were left instantly homeless. The presidential palace, hospitals, basic infrastructure, all reduced to rubble in mere moments.
And this brilliantly illustrates how systemic vulnerabilities absolutely compound natural disasters. Years of agricultural neglect and policy failures had fundamentally shifted Haiti's economy, leaving the nation importing 60% of its food. So what does that mean? It means when the global food crisis hit in 2008, which was right before the earthquake, by the way, the population was incredibly vulnerable to price spikes. This led to widespread hunger and civil unrest even before the ground literally shook.
Now, the international response to the 2010 earthquake was massive, but it was also highly flawed. Over 100 nations and 300 NGOs arrived to provide aid, and they raised billions of dollars. However, major players like USAID largely bypassed local Haitian governance, moving into positions of unquestioned power. This lack of local integration and, honestly, a lack of cultural respect created massive logjams, totally hindering long-term rebuilding efforts. And tragically, the foreign presence brought its own completely preventable disaster. A horrific cholera outbreak was introduced to the country's waterways via infected waste from an international peacekeeping base. It just compounded the misery. Chapter 6: A Legacy of Resilience. Culture, Spirit, and Survival. Now, it is absolutely essential that we don't just view Haiti purely through the lens of tragedy. Because despite these compounding historical burdens, the Haitian people possess an incredibly enduring cultural spirit. One of the most misunderstood elements of this is Vodou. First off, it is absolutely not the magic you see in Hollywood movies. Let's just clear that up right now. Rather, it is a highly practical, syncretic worldview and a radical cosmology. Spanning centuries, it has served as an essential, unifying political and spiritual tool that gives mythic meaning to everyday hardships. It's allowed the people to maintain their identity and community even in the face of the most brutal oppression. Let's move to the modern day and see how this builds into the broader world. This enduring adaptability continues today through the massive Haitian diaspora. Seeking to escape political oppression and economic hardship, millions of Haitians have built amazingly resilient communities abroad. Many of these individuals are well-educated professionals who have seamlessly integrated into the global workforce. They represent Haiti's ongoing adaptability and a continuous, fierce fight for acceptance and stability, even when facing immense systemic hurdles and prejudices in their host countries. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. We've seen how centuries of exploitation, crushing debt, and foreign interference have shaped the present reality. But can targeted structural reforms, modern educational tools like media technology, and a genuine return to true self-sovereignty finally break Haiti's 500-year cycle of history? To change Haiti's future, the world has to first truly understand its incredible past, and above all, respect its local capacity to lead itself. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.